My name's Tom Gaze, and I'm director of the Rockefeller Institute of Government. I want to thank first the League of Women Voters, including Barbara Bartoletti and Laura Bierman, for co-hosting today's event. It has been a pleasure to work with them, and I'm Barbara. Is Laura here too? Or, okay, Laura's right there. We will be working on another event coming up fairly soon. There's a few other forums I'd just like to announce before I talk about today's topic. On October 5th, this Friday, we're going to have a forum in New York City at the New York Federal Reserve called Distressed Residential Real Estate Dimensions, Impacts, and Remedies. It's an all-day event. It is co-sponsored with the New York Federal Reserve Bank, and our Jim Filane, one of our senior fellow here, is going to present some fascinating information on the Northeast residential real estate market and some of the recent changes. And Dick Peach of the Federal Reserve has got some good national data. We have Mark Zandi and a few other people. It's a wonderful project, a wonderful program. On October 18th, we have a discussion of a new book on the Nelson Rockefeller called Orioles and Dubonnet. SUNY Press is putting it out, and it is co-sponsored with the New York State Archives Partnership Trust and SUNY Press. On October 31st, we have a discussion of another book, and that is one that Jason Lane, who's here someplace, I think in the back, there he is. Jason Lane and Bruce Johnstone of the University of Buffalo edited based on a number of articles by people who participated in a conference on the economic role of universities and colleges. It was a wonderful conference with a national audience, a national participation, and it's some excellent chapters as well. And that's October 31st. On November 29th, Jerry Benjamin and we are working on a discussion of constitutional convention and an agenda for a constitutional convention in New York State. So stay tuned for that. We're also working on, as I mentioned, with the League of Women Voters, putting together a forum this fall on campaign finance reform, as well as another one on the use of of drones in Homeland Security. And if you think you don't have anything to worry about, you don't see them, well, maybe they're just doing a good job out there, keeping quiet. Anyway, it's great to start off with a project or with a topic like mandate reform in the fall, because from now on, after this, every other problem is going to look a lot easier. There's no question that many local governments are in trouble right now, not just in New York, but across the country. Property taxes have declined and continue to lag, and Lucy Didayan, one of our fellows here, wrote a wonderful report. It's on our website about that issue. So has state aid. Pew Center for the States has published an excellent piece on declining state aid to localities, including the finding that there's been almost a 3% drop between 2009 and 2010 in just 1 year. But the spending pressures obviously are still strong, whether they be in healthcare, basic services, rising pension costs, and many, many others. So local governments are looking to restructure their budgets, but state and federal requirements can make the restructuring very difficult. Well, the mandate issue is even more challenging in New York, partly because of a certain structure in the way we deliver services and finance programs. There's a deep split in between where we get public funding and where governments actually implement programs. Local governments do most of the actual implementation of programs in New York. About 8 out of 10 public employees in the overall public workforce in New York State are local employees. Whereas most of the revenues used to fund New York State programs are raised by the state. And so there's obviously a tension that comes out, just that split in the roles of the two levels of government. But one of the biggest challenges in mandate reform is the fact that there isn't any one big choice to make. One of our candidates for presidential office, I read just yesterday, says he wants to make this whole issue, this election, about choice. Well, he thinks that there is one big choice to be made. The problem with mandate relief, there isn't just one big choice between, there's no simple balance or compromise between flexibility and relief on the one hand and central control and accountability on the other. Rather, if relief or reform or whatever you want to call it comes out, it emerges out of dozens or even hundreds of separate decisions, all involving many different issues, all involving many different values. Each decision may involve extremely different problems, different histories, different laws, and each one of them, sometime in the past, someone thought that this mandate made a lot of sense and was able to convince a lot of other people that it made a lot of sense as well. Well, fortunately, we have some great speakers today to talk about the matter. First, we're going to start off with Robert Megna. Bob is actually coming here and substituting, and I thank him for that, for Larry Schwartz, who was unable to appear today. Bob, as many of you know, is director of the New York Division of Budget. I'm delighted to have Bob today. He's one of our favorite speakers here at the Institute, which is saying a lot, not only because we have a lot of great speakers, but also because he usually has nothing very pleasant to say. It's good that he's here. As budget director, Bob is responsible for overall development and management of the state's fiscal policies. He's also a member of the 11-person Mandate Relief Council, which was established to review and advance proposals to reduce the statutory and regulatory burden on local governments and school districts. Before Bob was appointed budget director in 2009, he served as commissioner in the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, and before that, he was chief of the Economic and Revenue Unit in the New York State Division of the Budget, and many other things as well. Actually, one of my decisions this year is to streamline my bios, so I'm going to cut back on everything and a lot of these biographies. You can always look them up on Wikipedia if you really want to find out more about everybody, and there you can actually add things if you learn something about them too. Following Bob, then we're going to have Senator Elizabeth Little. Senator Betty Little is also a member of the Mandate Relief Council, and she too is well prepared for that role. She's represented the 45th Senate District for 10 years now. Before that, she was in New York State Assembly for 7 years, and she was also a member of the Mandate Relief Redesign Team, which issued its final report at the end of the last year. During these years, she's worked on many local government issues, including efforts to encourage local governments to share services, and she now serves as Deputy Majority Leader for Intergovernmental Affairs and a member of the Senate Finance Committee. Then we're going to hear from Timothy Kramer. Tim is Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association and has served in that position since 1998. Before joining the association, he was employed by the Ohio School Boards Association for nearly 20 years, serving the final 4 years as Deputy Executive Director. As the School Board Association's Chief Executive Officer, Tim leads a staff of 56 professionals engaged in advocacy, information, and leadership development for the state's 5,000 school board members and 665 member boards. He also was a member of the Mandate Relief Redesign Team. And then finally, we'll turn to Steve Aquario. Stephen is Executive Director and General Counsel of the New York State Association of Counties, a position he's held since 2004. In this capacity, Stephen has been responsible for the overall direction of the association, including coordinating and prioritizing agendas to assure a cohesive legal and legislative strategy on behalf of the New York State's 62 county governments. And Stephen, too, was a member of the Mandate Relief Redesign Team. Final instructions: turn off anything that's going to go beep, squawk, buzz, sing, whatever. We just want to hear from people. And I hope we have, and I expect, since it's 2 hours, that we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions. So at that point, when you do ask a question, Give us your name and any affiliation you'd like to share with us. Thank you very much. Bob.
How do you want to do this? People get up?
Why don't you get up here so we can just see you, if you don't mind. If you would like to sit down, Bob. I mean, you are budget director, so it's.
Let me turn this thing on.
Hello? Okay. I want to thank Larry for missing out on this meeting today, first of all, and letting me know this morning that I was doing this, or late last night. I think on my, bio, I think it can be described simply, and I think I've mentioned this to folks before, is he just goes from one bad job to another. So I think my bio could be very short. Going from tax to budget was like, I think really, that's the one that put me in analysis. But I think, Tom set the stage very well. I think especially on this whole issue of where the money is raised and then where the money goes, and in many cases where the services are performed and who performs those services. Often the state is acting as a conduit, but the state then has to have the revenue to kind of support those services, both for school districts, for health care, for all of the myriad of services that get provided both by the state and its local government. So this Governor Cuomo, inherited a $10 billion gap. And this is not rocket science. There was a $10 billion difference between what our baseline spending was and what revenue we had to do that. So, serious, very serious fiscal decisions had to be made. Those decisions were taken with the real logic of trying to minimize the impact on local governments, but to eliminate the impact on local governments, to eliminate the impact on school districts, to eliminate the impact on healthcare providers was, of course, going to be impossible. So we closed the $10 billion gap, and I think what we tried to do and what the governor's focus was on was getting our own house in order. When I became budget director, the state workforce under executive control, not including SUNY and CUNY, not including the controller's office or the AG, was 136,000. Today, it's 118,000 and change. So we have significantly reduced the size of the state workforce. We have significantly curtailed state operation spending in an effort, not because those things weren't important to do, but to minimize the impact in other areas of the budget that are more concerned to local governments and school districts. So, for example, we have reduced state operation spending by over 10% in most of our agencies. And we also have agencies that provide services, of course, so it's difficult to do. Our biggest agencies are corrections, mental health, and mental hygiene facilities where the state is actually operating and providing a service. And we have found significant savings in those areas as well as other areas to try to reduce the impact in other places. But we know the impact of this Great Recession has been significant. As soon as we got some breathing room, though, in the past year, the governor's second budget, what we tried to do was say, look, we know the pressure that's on local governments. What are the biggest things we could do within the financial constraints we're facing to try to limit the impact of these very severe fiscal strains on local governments and school districts? And one of the first things we did last year was we eliminated growth in Medicaid budgets at the local level. As you guys know, New York State was one of the only states in the country to have a significant local share for Medicaid spending. We had capped that growth at 3% a year a few years ago. Now, over a 5-year period, we'll totally eliminate that growth, and so local spending on Medicaid will stay flat forever. So eventually, the state will be taking over a bigger and bigger share of Medicaid spending. which for our counties in New York City is a significant financial burden, as we know. In fact, we believe we're saving the city and the counties $1.2 billion over 5 years just with those actions. The other thing we accomplished last year, which again has a longer term view to it because of the fiscal situation that we're in and also just the mathematics of this one, is pension reform. So we passed Tier 6. It was a difficult negotiation, but it will save the state and local governments more than $80 billion over a 30-year period. Most of that savings accrues to local governments in New York City. So again, we think, yes, not immediate relief, but over time, significant relief to local governments. Last year, on a smaller basis, but still important, we passed early intervention reform, where we're kind of taking the administration of early intervention out of the county's hands and moving it up to a state fiscal responsibility. And we believe that'll save localities about $50 million over a 5-year period. Let me go back. On Medicaid, what we've also done is set over that same 5-year period where we're capping growth, which is really we're capping it over a 3-year period. But over a 5-year period, we're going to take over the administration of the program. So we believe significant mandate relief in the sense of taking over those costs that over time will provide a substantial financial benefit. There are other smaller actions. And then there are things we tried to achieve that we really didn't make as much progress on as we wanted. So for example, pre-K special education, we saw an editorial in the New York Times yesterday saying that we have to get more control over that. Well, we proposed significant reforms in that area last year, and we weren't able to get as far as we like with that. But again, growth in that program alone is over $200 million. So if we can get our arms around ways to reform some of these programs, both at the state and the local level, working with providers, we can make another dent in the kinds of issues that local governments are facing on the fiscal side. One other thing I'd mention, which no one's going to think is a good thing, but believe me, it has been a very difficult thing to maintain, which is we have kept AIM funding flat for the past 2 years. And while I know that's not good news for cities, it is better than what we have done in most areas of the budget, which is to cut back programs significantly. So we have recognized how important AIM funding is and tried to keep it constant. We know there are some inequities in the AIM formula as it currently exists, but reforming the AIM formula is also difficult because we don't want to create any losers in a very difficult fiscal environment. So there's those things and other things we've tried to do to help keep the fiscal challenges to local governments at a minimum. On the school aid side, again, not a perfect solution, but we had unsustainable increases in education aid built into our out-year gaps. What we have done is said in the 2 areas where we spend the most money, let's try to rationalize how we spend that money and keep growth at a pretty good level. So for both Medicaid and education aid, we tied them to indices that grow at roughly 4% a year, plus or minus some small fractions. Again, 4% growth in education aid is probably disappointing for folks, but it's significantly above the rate of inflation and significantly above spending we're doing in any other area. So again, an important point is to tie all these things together given the obvious constraints that we face. In addition, I'll close because I'd like to hear from the other panel members. We have the Mandate Relief Council, We have been paying very close attention to the recommendations that we've received from the Mandate Relief Council. We are looking for every opportunity within the fiscal constraints we face to eliminate additional mandates. We would love to eliminate a lot of the reporting requirements that we impose on local governments and are very seriously looking at a proposal to significantly reduce the amount of unnecessary duplicative reporting that we ask local governments and school districts to provide to us. We are also looking for other opportunities to find areas where we can significantly reduce mandates that are imposed on governments, including regulatory reform. The secretary to the governor, who couldn't be here today, one of the things that he is working on very diligently, and for those of you who know Larry, you know that that's a euphemism for something else, but he's working very hard to uncover those regulations that we're imposing both all over state government that cost local governments both money, time, and effort to conform with. So we have a significant regulatory review process that is taking place. So given what we've accomplished in a very tight fiscal environment, again, we think the reforms passed last year Exactly. So anyway, I'll close with that, and I'd love to hear from the panel members.
Thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I also appreciate having the word challenge used when they talk about mandate relief. So thank you, Tom, because it is a challenge. For every mandate, there is an advocate. And when you try to remove the mandates, those advocates have not gone away. And so it makes it very, very difficult to try to change a lot of these things. And as I have found out in my years in government, and I do represent 6 counties, 85 towns, 25 villages, and 53 school districts, so I do hear a lot about mandate relief, is that everyone wants less government, lower taxes, and no change. So with that in mind, it makes it very difficult. There are 2 kinds of mandates. There is a statutory mandate, which the law requires, and then there are regulatory mandates. And many times when we pass a law, and then that agency does the implementation of the law, you get a lot more regulations. And I will tell you about one mandate that we passed, and a few years ago, was defibrillators in the schools. And that certainly was an expensive mandate for our schools. And yet we had an advocacy, we had children playing in sports, getting hit in the chest and needing it. And I actually have had people come to me, schools, and say that having that defibrillator saved money, but they didn't think kindly of it when it was mandated. And yet, we mandated defibrillators in the school. Then the regulations call about, the number of times they have to be tested, where they have to be located, one size for older kids, one size for younger kids, and the amount of training that takes place. And then we have groups that decide that they will be the trainers, and believe me, it's like watching mushrooms grow, because the regulations get so much greater. Another one that I had experience reading about today in the paper was in Washington County yesterday. They talked about mandates, and in their public defender's office, they were just told that they have too many cases assigned to their public defenders, and they are being required to hire 2 more public defenders. Now, that's a tough mandate. It's going to cost them money, but if you're on the other side and you need an attorney and you don't have good representation, which is a case that happened and the county is now being sued over that, and you end up in state prison and all of that because you didn't have good representation. That's a problem as well. I think the most important thing we need to do in some of these mandates is to get some flexibility. We are not a one-size-fits-all. What is good for the city of New York is really not good for the town of Arietta in Hamilton County, which is now taking the school district and making it an non-operating school district. The 15 kids are now going to go to another school and do tuition. But, you know, they get the same mandates in this town, and it's making things almost impossible for them. We have, as Bob mentioned, passed some really beneficial things. Tier 6, Tier 5, Tier 6. And yet we have the advocates coming in saying, and, you know, I meet with them, you shouldn't be supporting that tier. I said to them, wait a second, you should be supporting it to protect your own pension, because this is not sustainable, what we in New York State are doing. And therefore, we have to make those changes. And those have become law, both of those. We had a number of other things that have been passed. And, you know, when I try to explain it and say to people, like there's one for schools, that schools believe they were mandated to have a seat on the bus for every child that's enrolled in the school district. And the parent could not take their child and write a note and say, we don't need bus service this year. That wasn't allowed. Well, now it's on the average ridership. So, you know, many people would complain. They saw a school bus and it was only, you know, half full. And why are we doing this and what's the expense? I've had school districts tell me they've been able to eliminate a couple of bus runs, a bus driver, and a bus. So, and the bigger the school, the easier they are to do it. But they'll come back and say, well, those are little things. You know, that's too small. You don't have to do this. That's not going to save any money. And even in my conference, when I stand up and have these ideas, oh, that's not going to save anything. Well, it's like picking apples. You know, if you get the low fruit first, maybe you can fill the basket and have a basket full. And someday, this will be substantial when you start adding up all these things, because these are the things that we have to do. We now allow a county to contract on a federal list. We allow them to take good contracts that another county might have someplace in the state. And this year, I was a sponsor of a bill called the Piggyback Bill. And that would allow them to use any contract, municipality, school district could use any contract that they found in the country. Somebody had a big contract on dump trucks. They would be able to use that contract. So it has run into some problems because and it's in the comptroller's office. It was signed by the governor, and we're working on that. But it appears that the contract, if it's, for instance, a contract in Arizona, we have to say, does Arizona have the same requirements, bidding requirements that we have in New York State? Do they have the same minority and women-owned business requirements and all of that kind of stuff? So, as I said, it's like watching mushrooms grow. So things get more complicated as you try to do them. But I have been on the task force, the first task force, and I will tell you that you could see that that wasn't going to go very far because there were as many advocates as there were legislators and people on this side trying to do something about it on the council, but around the task force. But the council is entirely different. The council is made up of 2 senators, 2 assembly members, and agency people from all the governor's agencies. So I think we are going to get someplace. We had 10 hearings. I was able to make 9 out of 10. I will tell you that we hear the same things over and over. They want us to change pension. They want everybody to contribute into the pension fund now. And I will tell you that vote was a crazy vote when we took away the need to contribute into the pension fund. But at the time, we were being told the state pension was overfunded and had to return some money to the people. Well, everybody has looked through this. This is constitutional. You cannot diminish a pension benefit. So that's the need for Tier 5, Tier 6 as we go forward. The other one is the Triborough, hearing that, and those things continue to appear. We have a website. We're not really getting a lot of different ideas on that website. I will tell you one idea that really I was surprised at. A superintendent downstate, won't say anywhere, wanted to have tenure go from 3 years to 5 years, so that at the end of 5 years, they could save $60,000 by getting rid of a 5-year teacher and hiring a new teacher, having nothing to do with whether it was a good teacher or not or how it affected the school district. So I would encourage everyone here to take a look at that website and to really try and put down some things, even if they're small. Out of all the small ones, I think we will have some savings and it will make some sense. One of the bills that I introduced at the end of and Bob mentioned it, at the end of session, and it passed the Senate, but it was kind of late to get a lot of support for it at that point, was a reporting bill, where each and every report that an agency requires of a municipality or a school district will be reviewed as to, is this necessary? Is this the only place you can get this data? Is this duplicative of getting data from someplace else? And is it beneficial? And is this report going to be read? Big, big thing here, because they sure pile up on people's desks. So I think if we move forward, the towns and municipalities that I have talked to really think that that has some teeth in it, that could be helpful to them, trying to just be more efficient with our time, and then we could save people. And with that, I will listen to our other colleagues and await your questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Creamer, Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association, and it's a pleasure to be here. Obviously, I represent school boards or school districts from around the state, so we represent local decision-making, local control, you oftentimes hear it referred to. So we're kind of immediately placed in a position where many of the mandates that are put out by the state, be they regulatory or statutory, are things that we automatically have some concerns with, because we do believe that one size does not fit all, and that there should be local flexibility, and that we can attend to many of our needs in methods that are specific to our school district, rather than having them foisted upon us such that something in one part of the state has to be done everywhere. I had no idea there were going to be this many people here. I brought some handouts along, and I only brought 50. So if you got one, great. If you didn't, give me a card, and I'll be happy to send it to you. This sounds like it's moving loud. Is that better? Yeah. One of the things I brought along as evidence of us being involved in this kind of an issue for a long, long time is a report, we call it the Task Force on Maximizing School District Resources. Some years ago, you'll remember the Swazi Commission. You remember the Lundin Commission. I see Betsy here, and I see Dave here, or John here, I should say, and people who work very closely with those commissions. We thought that was our time. We thought that was the opportunity when we were going to have these hearings around the state and an opportunity for school district officials to explain things that we could do very specifically and save costs. And we ended up capturing many of the recommendations that came out of those reports in this, where we said to school districts, and some of this stuff is stuff that's contrary to what you would think a school district would want to do, but we said, here's things, recommendations that came from the Lundin Commission, came from the Swazi Commission, that you should consider. This is good stuff that could save you some costs. We're not telling you that it should be done on a statewide basis, but you at the local level may want to embrace some of these ideas. This is dated 2008. And some of these things have gotten some activity, but nothing here of a significant nature has been captured. And I'm disappointed to say that, but this was something going back to 2008. More noteworthy, perhaps, is that last year we issued what we called the Playbook. This is a copy of our NYSPA Essential Reform Playbook. This was in response to legislators primarily saying, what specifically are those mandates that you would want to be relieved from, and can you give us, A, some cost implications as to what you would save, and B, how we would do this? What might be the legislative proposal you have in mind? We said, okay, we'll do that. We drafted legislation on a variety of different things that included tri-borough, healthcare costs, last in, first out, layoffs, 3020A, which is the tenured teacher disciplinary rules, special education, purchasing, and pension reform. We drafted that legislation, we put together a bill memo, we put together background information and research and dollar amounts, and we delivered this booklet to every single legislator, members of the media. We did a press conference. And I am very proud of the fact that indeed pension reform and cooperative purchasing, two of the things that we had in that book, were passed. And I applaud the legislature and the governor for signing those pieces of legislation. Very, very helpful. It will save money, but there's more to be done. And some of the things that we have in here have significant cost implications. So this book continues to be valid. There are still some things in here that we believe are worth supporting. We will be continuing to advocate for these things, and there are other things as well, which I'll refer to in a moment. The other handout I gave was at least a portion of the website that Senator Little was referring to. This is the Mandate Relief Council's website, these two pages that I have out of here. One outlines the process whereby a local government would petition the council for mandate relief of some sort. And that's the diagram here tells the process to be followed. The one that's really noteworthy as far as I'm concerned is this other page that lists the school districts that have sought mandate relief. These are a listing of which school districts, many of them have sought multiple things, but those school districts have, frankly at our urging, have gone forward with a request, a petition to the Mandate Relief Council asking for relief from these sorts of things. We're very excited about the fact that there is such an opportunity for school districts to go to an official body and to petition for mandate relief. If you looked at that list, you would find very quickly that there's a thing in there that would allow for school districts to have a teacher retirement system reserve. We can reserve funds for the ERS, the state employees retirement system, where our non-instructional employees have their pensions, but the teachers' reserves or teacher pensions cannot be put in reserve, something that we are eventually going to have to pay out. It would be good to have that sort of thing. We have mandatory transportation requirements. Triborough pops up 9 times. Tier 3 and 4 contributions after 10 years of service, something that the senator referred to, pops up frequently. Last in, first out, this idea of having to use seniority first and foremost in making decisions about making layoffs. I just interviewed a young man yesterday for a position with my organization. And this is how this last in, first out has horrible effects. Here's a young man who's 9 years as a teacher. The last 3, he's been in one school district. I won't name the school. So he's least senior. Here's a young man who is married with 2 kids, probably a terrific teacher. By all the references we've checked, he's a wonderful teacher, including parents that told us. And he has now been cut down to a 0.6 position. He said, I can't make it. Here's a guy whose father was a teacher, his mother was a teacher, his wife is a teacher, everyone he knows is a teacher, and he's going to leave the profession with disgruntled, I might add, because this law and, quite honestly, his union that supports that say that that's what we believe. And here's a young man who would be a terrific teacher and probably a card-carrying union member who now feels like, I got to leave the profession. I'm going to go work for the School Boards Association. He hasn't even told his father that yet. You see other things on there about reserve funds for TRS. APPR is the Teacher and Principal Evaluation System that has huge funding impact. This could be the mother of all unfunded mandates right here. Much of the money that comes to school districts to support APPR activity is federal dollars. School districts have told me for every $1 in federal money that we're getting to support our reform efforts, we're probably spending about 10 of our own. Nothing scientific about that, but I think it's a pretty accurate assessment. Special education burden of proof comes up 6 times on this list. And you can read it for yourself. But here is, if you were to do a poll, if the legislature or the governor were to say, Tim, what are those cost drivers, those mandates you're talking about. Here they are. Here they are. And I can tell you right now, if you were to go to our playbook, you would find that we have assembled significant information, legitimate research and data to support our recommendations. On the healthcare costs, we would recommend that there be a limit, a cap on what local employers would have to pay for healthcare premiums, 85% for the individual premium, 75% for family. That is significantly less than private employers nationwide, significantly less than other states nationwide. Special education, in this state, we have the most expensive special education system in the country. We have over 200 additional mandates on top of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a federal requirement. We have 200 on top of that. We would recommend that there be a commission, an advisory council assembled by the governor, the state education department, so we sit down and say, do we need to really keep all those 204? Is there some things here that are archaic, unnecessary? Could we reduce our costs in special education? Teacher disciplinary procedures, the 30-20A system. If you go from the beginning of filing a motion to dismiss a tenured teacher, and go all the way through the process, on average, you're going to spend 502 days and over $200,000. Triborough reform. I can tell you that we would want to change Triborough such that we don't want to dismiss anybody. We don't want anybody to lose their job, lose their salary, lose their benefits, but these contracts have expired. And people are getting an automatic step increase every year, on average 2%. Buffalo City School District has not renegotiated their teachers' agreement since 1999. It expired in 2004. They're still operating off that same contract. They get 2% increase and 100% paid for health care benefits, including cosmetic surgery. They got a really good-looking staff over there in Buffalo. And we have other information in here. I won't take up any more of your time. I will acknowledge the fact that Assemblyman Kolb has put many of our stuff into an omnibus bill that he introduced last year, and we hope that others will take up on that. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Executive Director of the New York State Association of Counties. I'd like to thank the Rockefeller Institute, the League of Women Voters, for the opportunity to present some comments, if you will, to frame the issue, to educate those of you in this room, those of you that will be watching this at a later point in time, and importantly to the citizens of the state, as they come to understand what's going on in government, both at the federal level, the national election, state election this November as well, and also issues in the newspaper that are taking place on a daily basis about what's going on in local government. So in order to do this, I thought I'd start with the projected county fiscal gap. So this chart here that we're showing the audience here is a snapshot in time in September of 2011. The red line represents the mandated expenditures on New York's 57 counties and the city of New York, and the blue line represents the available revenues to these local governments as of September of 2011. If you look at this, what we refer to as a JAWS chart, you see the jaw opening up there a bit, $6 billion a projected deficit. $6 billion outside New York City with a structural inherent deficit, with the blue line representing the revenues of an economy that started in recession in 2008, slowly flat here in 11. You can see the revenues there are generally way below the mandated expenditures. So we heard from our speakers a short time ago from the state budget representing New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo. We heard from State Senator Elizabeth Little who represent 6 counties in the North Country. They acted. They saw this deficit and they did something about it. What did they do? You heard from the speakers earlier. I won't repeat it. I'll generally acknowledge the cap on the growth of Medicaid, the pension reform, the early intervention reform, as Mr. Megna pointed out, and so too did county officials take action, enacting significant spending cuts, workforce, and revenue actions to lower the trajectory of that spending to help close the fiscal gap. So where are we today? If we look at a snapshot in time, fast forward 1 year to today, this is the structural gap, $4.2 billion. Over a period of years, 8 years, 6 years. It's not 20 years that we're talking about. We're talking about 6 to 8 years in the future here. A structural deficit here for the county in New York City at $4.2 billion. The state has made progress, and we've talked about that. It used to be $6 billion. It's $4.2 billion right now. Compounding this situation is that we have now new limitations on the blue line. We have a state-imposed property tax cap, a good thing. We have new local home rule bills not being moved through the state legislature for approval. What are they? Sales tax increases, mortgage recording tax, hotel-motel taxes, anything that we could use to raise revenue locally to offset property taxes. Why? We want to follow the governor's lead. The governor says our taxes are too high in the state. Our property taxes are too high. The state legislature has declared it. We agree. We're trying to find the revenue to run the programs and the services. I think if we take a minute here and look at what is a mandate, from our perspective or from a generally accepted perspective, it's a program or service. It's a program or a service to another. Meaning it could be an environmental or a labor service. It could be the construction of a facility or the upgrade of a facility. In our instance, a courthouse or a jail. The Wicks Law. We often don't even bring it up anymore. Or it could be also a tax break or an exemption on property tax, which the mayor of Albany knows all too well about property tax exemptions in his city. A mandate usually requires a county to adhere to rules set by the federal or state government. They generally come in two forms. A funded mandate. On occasion, the level of government will fund it. In our particular case, in this particular instance, food stamps. 100% funded by the federal government for our citizens in need. It comes in another form, unfunded or underfunded. If we look at that same example of food stamps, 100% federal program, they don't pay for the administration. Therefore, the mandate becomes unfunded. The very same mandate that was funded by the federal government now costs the counties of the state $300 million to administer that federal program. Other unfunded or underfunded mandates include Medicaid, preschool special education, early intervention. Let's take a look at 9 of the largest mandates that you hear the counties of the state talking about on a regular basis. These are just a sampling of them, of 9. Look at the cost of these programs. In 2012, Medicaid alone, $7.5 billion. You saw, now you can see why the state acted. It was growing $60 million every single year outside New York City. The state acted. Pension costs rose 30% per year over the last 4 years. $1 billion the counties of the state will now pay towards the state's pension system annually. Temporary assistance, needy families, safety net, child welfare, These are the county's costs. If you look at this chart and the amount of money that we begin to talk about here, eventually the math overwhelms any budget. Let's keep in mind inflation ranging between 2 and 3%. The increases in one of these programs, pension, consumes the entire amount of our property tax cap levy growth. Let me repeat it. Pension costs alone, the increase of pension costs for New York County consumes every dollar available through our property tax cap levy growth. Eventually, the math overwhelms any budget. Here's another chart explaining what this means a different way. The red line is the cap limit of allowable levy growth for New York's 57 counties, 114 million. The blue box represents the pension cost, 135 million. You can quickly see a $244 million increase in 2013 unless something is done about this by the state of New York. These 9 programs alone will automatically rise $244 million. What's our levy growth again? 114 million. The 2012 cost of these 9 major mandates, this year alone, we are sending $12 billion to the state of New York from your local economy, your local counties, the city of New York, to fund these programs as partners in government. There are other mandates in addition to the 9 I just mentioned, dozens of them. This is just a sampling of the mandates which the counties of New York are required to provide for New Yorkers: foster care, adoption, public health, community college costs, veteran services, court security, election law, consumer protection, and on and on. One county reported to me today that 2/3 of their available property tax cap levy growth, the amount of money the state says they can raise in additional property taxes, 2/3 of that will go to pay for community college chargebacks alone. So the struggles of these local governments are going to be severe. Let's look at some kitchen table math. Another way of saying, how do we understand this complicated property tax system, the levy? What is the levy? From our perspective, the county budget is the amount of money necessary to operate the government. It includes the total cost of the local services. What are they? Roads, bridges, public health expenditures, economic development activities, quality of life initiatives, plus those mandated by the state. When you determine that amount of money that's necessary for expenditures, you subtract the amount of money that's collected by the county, including state and federal reimbursements, direct aid, local fees, mortgages, and sales tax, and that equals the tax levy. And that's what these governments need to ask the people to make up the difference, or the shortfall, between the state reimbursement and from the state and federal government. If we look at the first year of the historic property tax cap that was passed, 50 New York counties met this property tax cap out of 57. The cap does not apply to the city of New York. 7 counties did not meet the cap and therefore overrode that decision. 14 counties voted to override simply as a precaution of what could happen next. How long can the trend continue? As the mandates continue to grow, as the 2013 budget continues to come out, we'll see how long the trend to stay under New York's property tax cap can continue. What we're seeing right now is governing by triage at the county level. It's not what to cut, it's when and how much. Counties are privatizing serious, major, historical assets that they have been in the business of for over 200 years. They have been providing the service. Nursing home, long-term care. 3 closed or sold in 2012. 17 homes in jeopardy of being sold or closed. Over 50 certified home health agencies being sold or closed in the last 5 years. Mental health agencies, land, buildings, and equipment. Only time will tell if the impact of these decisions was the right one. This chart here shows over the past 5 years, state-mandated expenditures in one snapshot of a county, happens to be Rensselaer County, and our Rensselaer County Executive Kathleen Jimeno is with us here today. Increased state-mandated expenditures up 54% over a 5-year snapshot in time. Local spending down 11%. What's being cut in Rensselaer? What's being cut in counties across the state? Senior and youth services, veterans, drug enforcement, sheriff road patrol, roads and bridges, economic development, not-for-profit contributions, library contributions, soil and water, cooperative extension, lack of investment in community colleges, and on and on. And this will be the trend. In an article I read today from Chautauqua County about a sheriff arguing with his legislature, his county executive, for increased law enforcement. Our local inmate population in Chautauqua County has gone up dramatically, says Sheriff Gerasi. I don't have the authority to commit someone, and I don't have the authority to release someone. The expenditures in the sheriff's office is projected at $23 million in this small western New York county. Revenues are expected to drop next year by $1 million, creating increased local share. We're getting annihilated here, says the sheriff. We're getting in all these emergency calls, and there is no one here to take them. Our response time has increased. The additional measure would cost $400,000 more than the county executive proposed. Mr. Megna talked about the state workforce. It's declined. That hurts to deliver the public services. So too have the county's workforce declined. This chart here, we've tried to do more with less, says the slogan. We're doing less with less now. And this chart illustrates the public employment at the county level at historic lows of around 81,000. Salary freezes, hiring freezes, abolishing unfilled positions, demotions, hour cuts, pay cuts, shared work, limiting overtime, reducing benefits. And the triage continues. We're depleting revenues. Not a good thing to run your government without a rainy day fund. What's going to happen with another natural disaster to hit our state? Some counties will completely deplete their available reserves. Others are close behind. Some are at their constitutional tax limit. We're delaying or reducing capital construction. We're borrowing for our pension costs. Who would have ever thought we would do that? We're closing facilities, clinics, nursing homes, museums, and parks. And as the former lieutenant governor mentioned, we will go socially bankrupt before we go financially bankrupt. Let me repeat. Are we going to go bankrupt in this state? Our local government's going to voluntarily say, I want to file for bankruptcy? I don't think so. Last resort. What are they going to do? We've been told we can't raise our property taxes. We've been told we can't raise our sales taxes. We've been told we can't raise our motel, hotel, tourist taxes. What are we going to do? We're going to cut. And it's going to hurt, and there's going to be a lot of sacrifice. And that's what we're seeing across the state, from Long Island to Niagara Falls to the Adirondacks. It's going to be painful. Critical relief by the state. You have to acknowledge the state Senate. You have to acknowledge the state assembly, the governor of this state. Taking over $1.2 billion at a time when the state lacks the resources to do much of anything. You have to acknowledge it. You have to give credit to Governor Cuomo, to the state legislature, for doing their part. And this is a challenge in mandate relief. It is very difficult, but we have to do something. For the relief and pension reform comes in 5 to 10 years when we begin to hire more. It doesn't affect the present costs. But we do acknowledge it. It has to be put in context. And here's some of that context. The blue representing the obligation of the local governments to pay Medicaid without the reform. $39 billion. The red, that's what New York counties pay in Medicaid, $37 billion, even with the new law. The next highest state, $5 billion over 5 years in California. Pension plans. This is going to be a severe problem in 13 and 14 and going forward. It's projected to rise in 13. It's projected to rise another 2% in 14. How are the local governments going to afford this pension payment of $5 billion and growing? The tier helped. It was necessary. But the benefit is constitutionally protected. The legislature is hamstrung on what it can do to address this. But we need to address it. The state controller needs to address it. It's unsustainable. So in closing, what do we do about all this? Well, we can't propose a cost shift of preschool special education to school districts where it properly resides. No county in New York State has an education department, yet it's running preschool special education or paying for it while the schools run it. The schools should have this program, but we can't shift it to the school district. They can't afford it, nor can their taxpayers. So shifting it between governments from the counties to the state or from the counties to the school districts is not the answer. Mandate reform, program reforms must benefit all levels. NYSAC, the counties and the state will focus on programs that benefit the state, that benefit the county, because it's unsustainable for the state as well. And as Senator Little mentioned, there is a constituency behind every mandate, making the decisions that much harder in Albany to force change, but we must engage these constituencies, the people who are receiving the services and the providers that are providing these services, and getting everybody at the table to bring about the reform that's necessary. So thank you again to the Rockefeller Institute for giving us a forum to talk about this issue, to the League of Women Voters who's going around the state making this issue known to the citizens, and we appreciate any questions that you might have.
Give a hand to all of our speakers. And now I'd be delighted to let the speakers want to speak to anyone else. Any responses? So,
I probably shouldn't, but yes. Before we all go and hire a moving van to move out of New York State, we ought to talk about how we are really definitely trying to do something about this. And I do think that under the governor's leadership, we have cut costs, cut government at the state level, done a lot of consolidation of agencies at the state level, and really working to be more efficient and to be able to help them. Steve mentioned the nursing homes, and I have 6 counties. One doesn't have a nursing home, but they are selling their nursing home. And I think that in many ways it's an emotional issue, but when you have to really stop back and think about it, why did the county have a nursing home? Most of them evolved from the county poorhouse and helping people who couldn't get help someplace else. And at that time, your private nursing homes would not take Medicaid. So therefore, the counties took the Medicaid patients and had the county nursing homes. Now, 85% and sometimes more of every patient in a nursing home is on Medicaid, public or private. And no matter how you look at it, there are efficiencies in the economies of scale. We had a nursing home once that had 40 beds. They said, no way can you make it. Then they have 80 beds. Now they can't make it at 80 beds. You have to, with the regulations and all the Medicare and insurances and all that coming down the pipe, certainly we've done that. Going back to the Medicaid, I think the takeover is helpful, but more than that, this year we have 212 state employees who are now working on the intake on Medicaid in the counties. And eventually I think there will be 1,200 state employees doing the intake, so that those who are coming in to the Medicaid system are eligible on the same basis in every county and in the city of New York. And if you want to talk about the city of New York, they spend 11.07 cents on Medicaid per personal income, whereas the county of Putnam spends $1.63. And when you talk about a total takeover of Medicaid, 70% of that state money, excuse me, I forgot I had that, would go to New York City. So we are trying, and I believe that the state is trying, not just to help with the cost of Medicaid, but to also reduce the spending on Medicaid and get some control over it so that we're not wasting and that we are helping those who are truly in need. This prescription program, the e-prescription that we did this year is, you know, I know the medical offices are complaining, but they are going to have to check. Has this patient been to 4 or 5 other doctors and gotten a narcotic drug that he's going out on the street and selling? So those are the things that we are doing that should bring the cost of Medicaid down. A few years ago, there was a proposal for the state to take over the Medicaid to any county that was willing to give up 1% of their sales tax. And I believe Monroe County did that. Many of the counties I represented, a couple of them, their sales tax was lower than their Medicaid costs, and in some it was just the opposite, so many didn't. But when you talk about how California requires less from the counties, they also keep 6.25% of their sales tax, whereas New York State sales tax only gets 4% and the counties get more. I have counties that want to go to the 8%. I still have 2 of the 6 counties that are at 7. 3 out of 6 are still at 7%. So shop in my district. But you know, it's just not the time. Everything we look at talks about people leaving New York State because we're #1 in taxes. Well, sales tax, bed tax, mortgage tax, you can call it whatever you want, but it's still a tax. So, you know, I'm a little bit frustrated, definitely, but we are trying, and we are trying to come up with some legitimate good things, and even if they're small, let's put 5 to 10 small things together and get something for it. But thank you.
Tim, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we are members of a coalition called Let New York Work that is the School Boards Association, the school superintendents, but we are also the mayors. We are the Business Council, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Unshackled Upstate, and I think there's 19 or 20 of us. It's really an extraordinary coalition because here were the groups, the business advocates, business who advocate on behalf of people who own their own businesses typically, who were big proponents of the tax cap. You can imagine my organization opposed the tax cap, but it happened. These people who were in support of the tax cap came to me and said, we were expecting that there would be mandate relief to follow the tax cap. And in fact, the people that we represent, these private business owners, they send their kids to your school districts. They pay taxes into your school districts. They live in those communities. They do business with those school districts. They don't want to see these school districts go south. So they joined with us, and we have been very, I've been very impressed with the coalition that we've built of private business owners who pay taxes and employers on the public sector, such as the people whom I represent, working together on mandate relief. And we have a 6 or 7 point agenda, and we've been going around to the legislature and trying to make sure that they know that on both sides of this equation, we're together.
1 or 2 things. Just some perspective, I think, sometimes which we lose because everyone's very passionate about these issues and we are in very, very difficult fiscal times. But I think sometimes we wake up and say, gee, we're the highest cost and highest tax state in the country. Gee, that's everybody else's fault. You know, we got here over a prolonged period of time, and now we're all in the same situation of trying to grapple with very, very difficult fiscal issues. And I think what the governor's been trying to do in the short amount of time he's been here is, as Steve mentioned, to try to start to address these things. This is going to be an ongoing process. but we've already talked about taxes. Look at any tax you want in New York State and compare it to any place else in the country and say we're lower. We're not at the highest already. The property tax report came out last week. Forget about downstate, which is what everyone wants to talk about. Taxes as a percentage of home value, the top 15 in the country, 13 are in upstate New York. How is that sustainable? So yes, there was a strong feeling actions had to be done on the property tax side, understanding that we're now in a constrained environment and we have to make very, very tough choices on the spending side. We talked about a lot of them. The state's been making a lot of them. We don't reduce the size of the workforce, flippantly. These are very difficult choices that have to be made. What we tried to do is limit the impact on local governments, but this is one of the longest recessions we've faced in the past 2 or 3 generations. Of course, it's going to be difficult to work ourselves out of it, especially given where we started. Some people in this room can remember something Steve alluded to and the senator alluded to, which is in 2000, not that long ago, we voted to eliminate an employee contribution to the pension plan. Well, now we have an unsustainable pension plan. Well, let's think of the context in which that was done. So now, given that that decision was made and we are stuck with it constitutionally, we have to figure out ways around it. And those ways around it are going to be very difficult and very painful. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yes, sir. Why don't you identify yourself?
John Clarkson, formerly of the Budget Division in London Commission, now Town Supervisor. My question is, are we constitutionally stuck with not charging the 2%? Because as I understand, the Constitution says you may not alter a pension right once granted, but that's not a pension, that's contribution. And I've heard it from knowledgeable people that they think now that is something that needs to be reopened.
I think one of your former colleagues and your former boss has already opined on this, that they believe that it would be unconstitutional. But certainly people are continuing to look at it. Well, I think the past 2 or 3, but the current one for now.
Right, because the pension costs, of course, are significant. This change to Tier 6 will save the town of Bethlehem not one penny because they're not hiring anyone. And I think that's true for most local governments at this point in time. Thanks for this.
E.J. McMahon, Empire Center. The increase in pension costs that's being complained about and cited is equivalent to 2 to 3 percentage points of salary per year. Now, an issue has been talked about here that also is driving an equivalent of 2 to 3 percentage points of salary per year, and that issue is the Triborough Amendment. My question is directed primarily at Senator Little, mainly because you're the elected official. The Triborough Amendment is cited over and over again for good reason, because the Triborough Amendment creates a powerful disincentive to negotiate changes in contracts and automatically locks in pay increases of 2 to 3% a year. A second Taylor law issue that's been cited by mayors in both parties all over the state and county executives who have police forces is the temporary law requiring or giving unions the right to invoke compulsory arbitration of their contract disputes, which in the teeth of the worst recession since the 1930s drove pay increases of 3 to 3.5%, awards at that level for police making well into 6 figures downstate. So, all over the state, local officials are calling for reform of those 2 laws. They're calling for repeal of the Triborough Amendment, repeal into a modification, I suggest repeal, and for some change at least, if not an end, to compulsory arbitration, which you will be asked to extend next year. Now, you mentioned Triborough. We understand the politics of Triborough. It has not changed because unions don't want you to change it. I was wondering if you could explain on the merits, based on the substance, what it is that is preventing the Senate from introducing a repeal of Triborough.
Well, we did introduce a change to Triborough last year as part of our mandate relief package, and that was just not having the steps. It's just a matter of the consensus that no one is going to support that in the legislature through the assembly won't support it. And so if it's not going to go there, it's not going anyplace.
I guess I missed the press conference where the Senate
It
came
was
together
just
to
part,
support
it was part of the omnibus bill where we talked about the Triborough.
One last question, then compulsory arbitration. Tonight I ask if Bob Magna can offer any comment on either of those issues on behalf of his boss. On compulsory arbitration, it expires next June, which means if you pass it, it will go to the governor's desk.
Again,
Are you going to extend it?
I'd have to go look back, EJ. That's not one that I was even aware expired this year, so I'll go back and, we'll see what the governor's position is on that one. And again, the senator, I think, was pretty clear on the whole Triborough.
On the other one, on the arbitration, we continue to try to have the ability to pay to be a consideration when it comes to municipalities, and we haven't gotten any place with that. But I've had several school districts that had zero increase this past year, even for the non-teaching because of their budget problems. So I think that, I agree, if there's a way to get around this pension contribution, I even thought if you could voluntarily, make people make a contribution, that we should do it. But we are told that, if we can find that it isn't constitutional, I think it would be immediately passed because it is necessary. And even those who are going to be receiving this pension understand that they want to make it sustainable. It's the politics of it all, that's for sure.
Oh, actually, I'm sorry, right over your head, but I'll come back.
Hi, Assemblyman Joel Miller. I'm the ranker on education in the Assembly. I'm, of course, on the Republican side with all the great power that we have. We talk about mandate relief. We talk about the increases in the cost of education. We talk about the increase in the cost of running counties. If you look at education as an example, with between 80 and 85% of the cost of education is payroll. You can't buy a pound of education, you can't buy a cubic yard of education, yet we keep talking about supporting education by increasing the salaries of the people who work in the education field, and that's controlled by school boards. In my district, during the worst of the recession, the Arlington School District, one of the larger ones in the state, gave a 6.7% pay raise. A couple of months ago, the Wappinger School District, which is the sixth largest school district in the state, gave teachers a pay raise and did not ask them to pay any more for their health care. Every teacher I spoke to said they did not believe that was going to happen. They all expected not to get the pay raise, and they all expected to be asked to pay more for their health care, but that did not happen. In fact, the Wappinger School District gave as a parting gift to their superintendent lifetime free health care after he had already gotten a job working for another district. My question is, while we're talking about mandate relief, where does the responsibility lie for handling salaries at the local level? There's absolutely no reason if, in fact, you have a step of 2% when everyone else, according to the newspaper, Dutchess County between 2008 and 2011 had a 2.7% reduction in average salary with a 20.9% increase in property tax, which goes to pay those salaries for the people who work for you. Why, while we're talking about mandate relief, even in the absence of changing the Triborough, why aren't we talking about school boards being more responsible, counties being more responsible, each local government level being more responsible? Because their costs are going up based on the salaries they paid. That should be part of the discussion. Why isn't it?
Well, based upon the council and the things that people are putting on our council, Triborough is one of them. It is going to have to be addressed by our council. And if we can get consensus, that would be...
It's actually a contraband spite of the step. The
well-
question is, where is that half of the responsibility? And they have that power to stop doing that. And when someone talked about a particular school district that did not give their teachers a pay increase above step since what, 1999 was the year, 2005 being the last when that contract ran out? That's being responsible. But considering the people who are asked to pay these taxes are really seeing no increase in their income, they are being forced out of their home. I mean, one of the arguments that, as an example, a teachers union will make is, well, we pay taxes too. Our taxes are going to go up. We understand that. And my response is, yeah, let me get this straight. You're willing to pay a $500 increase in property tax to get a $4,000 pay raise, while the person living in the house next to you is either underemployed, unemployed, or in one of those categories where they're earning far less money. They're going to be forced out of the home. Where's the equity in that argument? But yet we keep giving away the salaries. And that's the problem. Other than Medicaid, that's really our problem.
This gentleman over here was.
Good afternoon, Jim McCauley from Bethesda, New York, in one of those, Chappaqua, New York, which is kind of notorious for high taxes, especially school taxes, and that's how I got involved. I'm not going to repeat the other questions. I was going to ask the same questions about the constitutionality of the reinstating the 3%, because I think it definitely can't, it's in, I can't fathom that it's unconstitutional. However, there's another issue, is the pensions are not taxable in New York State. Our state grants many, I know the teachers, and I think many of the public employees, that pensions are not taxable. Not the Social Security, not disability, but the pensions themselves, they're not New York State taxable, they are federally taxable. I have many, many clients who are. I think that's something else that ought to be looked at. We can't do it on one side of the ledger, maybe we can do it on the other side of the ledger. The other issue that I wanted to ask about, I guess this is from Mr. Megna, is if Medicaid is shifted, Medicaid costs are shifted back to the state, gradually, all at once, whatever, we as state taxpayers are still going to have to pay for it somehow. It's just going from the county level to the state level. So if it's taken off the county, that's great from the county perspective. But me as a taxpayer, it's still going to have to be covered somehow. So where is it going to be covered? It seems that the only issue, and this cuts across numerous areas, is that the costs of all of these programs have to be cut. No. And I realize it's difficult, but that seems to be the answer across the entire spectrum of costs.
No question. And I think your question gets me to complete the thought. There's no way we would have taken over the Medicaid piece, which is why the governor didn't propose it in his first year in office, until he felt that he had a Medicaid structure in place so that we could take these costs over time without increasing the tax burden to pay for it. So we did the Medicaid redesign process last year, which was, I think, by any standard, very successful, which puts a cap on Medicaid growth over time at the state level and ties it to an index which keeps growth roughly down to 4%. We're talking about something that was growing 13, 12, 10% a year in years prior to that. So the question is a good one. The governor is absolutely committed to the premise that I'm taking over that cost because I can afford to do it within my existing structure, and I'm not going to ask taxpayers to pick up an additional burden. That's the full part of that equation, because we'll control healthcare costs. On the 3%, you're asking the wrong panel of people. Really, the controller is the sole custodian of the pension system. He can answer that question.
Thank Thank you very much. Kathy Jimeno, Rensselaer County Executive, and I have to respond to the Assemblyman's concerns about why are we looking for mandate relief from the state instead of looking at controlling our own costs. Rensselaer County is a slide you saw earlier presented by Steve Aquario, where the local costs over the last 5 years have been cut 11%. However, at the same time, our state mandated expenses have gone up 54%. We have indeed cut everywhere that we could, including in personnel. Last year, we were slated to take some really draconian cuts, including closing one of our senior centers, which meant denying meals at lunchtime to our seniors, getting rid of one of our veterans vans, which we use to transport veterans to their medical appointments. It meant cutting money to libraries that support libraries that aren't their own taxing districts. Those that are can raise their own taxes. They don't need it from me. And a whole host of other cuts. When our union stepped up to the plate and said, yes, we will give away our lucrative health insurance benefit for a somewhat less health insurance benefit. And mind you, they're still paying 20%. It's not as though they're getting it for free. 20% is a pretty good rate, I think, to get from our employees. And as well, they gave up other benefits. And what they got in exchange last year was a 0.5% increase in their salary, and this year a 0.5% increase in their salary. That's all. We've been asking everybody to do more with less. 3 years in a row, we've laid off people and cut programming, and we'll probably do it again this year. That's local programming. And we're doing that so that we can pay for the state expenses. Expenses this year that just between pension and retirement will be 3 times the amount that I could raise under a 2% property tax cap. 3 times. That difference is going to come out of local services. And when it comes, Senator, with all due respect, when it comes to raising taxes locally, if the math doesn't work, and I've got $20 million or more out in public safety projects that I've got to raise money for, including upgrading radios, not things of my choice, but things that we're required to do. If I have to come and ask for another revenue stream to pay for that, I don't think it's fair for the state to say, pay our bills and live within our property tax cap and figure out yourself how it is that you're going to make that work. We need to work cooperatively toward the issue of addressing the high costs that we're required to pay, and either those costs have to come down or you're going to have to let us look for other ways to pay for those same bills. And we do our share in terms of cuts. And I want to reinforce that. As I said before, you saw in the picture, we've cut and cut and cut. Now we need more help from the state. Thank you.
Thank you. And I served 9.5 years on Warren County Board of Supervisors. They probably would disown me now, but nevertheless, I understand and I see your frustration. One of the things that's not being talked about, and I've had bills and I've worked with Senator Bonasek on before, is looking at some of the tax-exempt properties. I will tell you that in my district, there are many colleges and universities, and some of you probably went to them, and they have a wonderful piece of property on one of the beautiful Adirondack lakes that today is probably worth, millions of dollars. It wasn't when they bought it, but it's tax exempt. There's a way to expand the tax base that if it's really and truly not being used as an educational facility, and you can only go there if you're an alumni of that school or you pay to go to one of their conferences. That's another one. One other thing is, and I've had this bill and I've been hung out on it and all, but condominiums do not pay market value on their taxes. They are not assessed at market value. They are assessed at their rental value. You've all been to the Sagamore, that's in my district. They have all those condos out there. They are assessed at like $300,000. They sell for $400, $500. Some of them been to $600, $700 when the market was up there, because they're being assessed at their rental value. The real property guy in the town of Bolton said he could raise his assessed value by 25% if he could put them into condos, if he could do condos at market value. And there are places in Colony where there are townhouses on one side of the road in a homeowner's at market value, and on the other side of the road, the townhouses are in a condo association, and they're assessed for less. Can't get anybody to really want to support that bill, and we have it every year. I had another bill that says you can charge a not-for-profit for water tax and sewer tax. Why not fire tax? I mean, everybody needs to have fire protection. It's not that much, but it certainly would help the local governments if they could expand the tax base that way. And yet, I turn around and pick up the paper, and one of my counties just expanded their senior exemption. So it is frustrating.
There's a lady in the 5th row, and then there's a gentleman in the 2nd row. Oh, hold it just one moment.
Hi, I'm Debbie Giorgenti. I used to be a councilman for the city of Rensselaer. I agree with Kathy Gemino. We've cut and cut and cut and cut our Rensselaer. We had gotten audited by the comptroller before it was Tom DiNapoli. We only raised taxes 3% in Rensselaer. It was 4 years I was on the council. The last year I was on the council, we had to raise 9.3 because we weren't making it. You can't give out 2% and 3% raises and only raise taxes 2 or 3%, especially when you get the mandates and all that, and we have lost and we have cut and cut and cut. You get to a point where you can't cut anymore, and it's got to stop.
Hi, I'm Assemblyman Bob Oakes. I'm the ranker on the Ways and Means Committee, and I just want to make the point, I think we have the issue of certainly the mandates that have been created over the years, some of those that I voted for and others have, and we have the issue of going forward and those mandates that will come across the desks of the legislature and the governor in this coming session and in future ones. I look back in this last session, there's 5 or 6, and it was already mentioned some about the teacher evaluation. There may be some money behind it now, but what happens when it goes and the cost that that's creating. And so a couple of things. One, I think from my perspective, one of the things I had suggested is that the governor, in a part of his budget, and I know he's proposed certain things, but perhaps suspend some targeted mandates, not eliminate them, but suspend them for a period of time while we review and see if we can eliminate those. So that's kind of a challenge maybe to put out. Another one is anything new ought to have a sunset to it, so we have to review it again, not that it never gets reviewed. And the other one is giving some county opt-outs within the existing ones. So we have things like Triborough, or for instance, on the private side, the labor law 240, 241, working from heights, a thing that provide or increases costs of doing business, and others. Are there ways to do that? So I would just throw that out and one offer a challenge. You know, certainly we would love to work with the governor and both houses of the legislature on some of those proposals, but perhaps the governor, who's had some success in leading us in certain ways, might be able to find some of those things, put as part of the budget, and then it might have a better chance of having some relief.
I think basically if you could give the communities and school districts the flexibility to achieve the same result in their way and show that they have been able to get that result. But you know, there's always the abuser that's out there, and then you get more and more regulations. I think for many people, the regulations are more onerous than the taxes.
If I can point out that of that list that I shared with you of all of the requests that have been submitted to the Mandate Relief Council from school districts, to the best of my knowledge, none of those requests have been approved. I'm not sure the Mandate Relief Council has collectively looked at those and may not have had the opportunity to do it yet.
I've looked at them, we haven't met yet.
Okay. But they're there. And I think this opportunity to seek and to make the case, it shouldn't be done inappropriately. Somebody has to make the case and provide an appropriate rationale that in fact we are wanting relief from this mandate with this alternative plan in place that we believe will work, will be successful, and we can do it at less cost. And I do think those proposals have been put forward. I really do hope that this process that the Mandate Relief Council has available to it and available to all of us as agencies and taxpayers is initiated and gets going as soon as possible.
The Assemblyman also raises a question about looking forward.
mean, there is a federal process against, related to unfunded mandates, such that the Congressional Budget Office does review bills and estimates the impact on state, local governments. So at least if there is, and it doesn't prevent unfunded mandates, but it makes it a much more public, transparent process. Do you anticipate anything like that happening, or is there any process now in place that estimates such mandates reasonably well?
Well, at the first task force, that was one of the things that was talked about, is having an independent fiscal note on every piece of legislation that gets passed, and that would make sense. Frequently, the person who is proposing the bill estimates or comes up with some figures as to what it's going to cost, and they're not always accurate. But I really think that a 3-year sunset, on so many things, had we done that on that pension contribution, we wouldn't, So, yeah, it is being thought about, and we need to do that.
I will suggest that sometimes those fiscal notes do result in a collective groan from those of us at the local level, because the question posed on the note is, what is the fiscal impact at the state level? And who's ever filling this thing out will oftentimes say 0.
Minimal.
Or minimal.
It's terrible.
I usually see 0. But it is, it's not going to impact the state at all. It's all going to be at the local level. And that's really where we have, kind of cause for some concern about the integrity of these fiscal impact statements.
I can tell you with some confidence, because I sit through it, is we have been trying, when bills come to the governor, to make sure that we're not just looking at the state impact, but also the local impact. And we certainly, in the process of reviewing all bills, look to the impacts that are sent to us directly from the local government. And sometimes those are very persuasive in how the governor views potential action on legislation.
Cheryl Neckerman, Schenectady Board of Education. I think one of our biggest problems looming is the pensions. And the excuse I always hear is that we can't reduce pensions because of the state constitution. Well, no state constitution is written in stone. There's always a way to amend it, but I've not heard anyone suggest amending the constitution. What is the process for doing that? And let's get started on it.
Well, we will have our on November 29th, we'll have a forum exactly on that. But
Actually,
please go on.
and a constitutional amendment, which we have done for properties exchanged in the Adirondacks, requires that it's passed by 2 legislatures, successive legislatures, and then it goes to the voter. So we had a couple that were passed this past year. If they get passed in January to June in the new legislature, they would be on the ballot in November. And I think that could work, to try to do it that way. But, and it's something that needs to be looked at. When you talk about even the school boards and negotiating and all, I have a superintendent who is now a superintendent of 2 schools, 2 small schools up north. And she's doing both, and she meets with both boards together 4 times a year. And everybody's studying whether this is working. She's gone to 1 transportation director for the 2 schools, 1 mechanic. She's been able to really make some savings. 1 business office is now doing both schools. And she had an idea for the primary school. The gym teacher was going to include music, and that was going to qualify, and she had from state ed that would qualify for her music class at that level. And you can imagine what the school board was like, the meeting, and the people came in, and there was 1 parent screaming about it, how this was not the way to do it, you couldn't do it, they weren't going to learn the music on it. Happened to be a music teacher in another school. So that advocacy, and you try to talk about consolidation and changes and all of that, and believe me, those who are personally affected really raise the campaign flags.
Elizabeth Lynham, Citizens Budget Commission. I wanted to ask about, I mean, a lot of these things are suggesting new commissions, new relief councils. In some cases, there has been legislation that can simply be plucked back up and reinvigorated. Last year, for example, there was a bill that went in for a number of special ed mandate relief measures, and these were small changes, considering the 200 or more that we impose above the federal law, but they were a handful of things that would make the process by which we put kids in special education a little bit closer to the federal requirements. And SED held lengthy input meetings, thousands of public comments were gone through, was embodied in a piece of legislation, went to the legislature, passed the Senate, died in the Assembly. So in some cases, I want to ask about, is it the time now where we're going to gather the political will together to do some of these things that we already had before us, that we've gone through a process on, and really pass them? Is this the year when mandate relief begins to have a certain priority in the scheme of things we're going to start passing in the state?
I think we have to, especially because we have the tax cap. And the tax cap is certainly bringing mandate relief to the forefront. They did make some changes on special ed. I actually read those 200 some extra mandates that the state has on special education over what the federal have. In one, it says who should be chairman of the committee on special ed. Another one said the bus driver driving special ed students should have training in dealing with special ed students. I would bet there were maybe 30 that might save some money, and they were all on class size and number of aides and that kind of stuff. And that's where you get the advocacy then coming in, the people with children in special ed. But they have made some changes. The psychologist, which they've done administratively, does not have to be at the IEP meetings. And if the parents agree with the IEP the second year, they don't have to have a meeting. They were having a meeting with the psychologist and the parents not even coming in. So there are some changes, but like I said, they're small, but they will add up. And we've talked about it in our conference. I can't tell you, I have proposals and lists and everything else. It has to happen. If you're going to downsize and you're going to get lower reimbursement rates and everything else, you have to get rid of some of the restrictions and the regulations and the requirements. And flexibility, I think, is the key to do it.
One quick comment on that. On something like pre-K ed, we've been talking today kind of as, separate levels of government where one is imposing the state or the federal government or whatever, the school boards on another level of government. But pre-K special ed is a perfect example where we should be working together because it's in our common interest to fix a program that is just growing at an unsustainable rate. And the politics of changing that program, quite frankly, are incredibly difficult, as most people in this room know. So we have to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse in that system, of which there is plenty. And that's something that we can only do together and jointly. And it would, significantly erase a significant problem that local governments, county governments are facing.
Yes.
Gabriel Panizza from Senator Jeff Klein's office. I'll take Senator Little's advice and go little. So it's not a big question here. To Director Megna, in terms of seeking to lower the number of reporting requirements, you mentioned in your talk that that's something that the administration is looking to do. Is that just, first, do you have an idea of a possible timetable by when such recommendation, well, not even recommendations, but things that the administration can do by itself, just by changing the regulations, when that might come out? And two, are we talking just cutting the requirements or perhaps streamlining the technology so that people may, I don't know, use some sort of new web interface instead of having to do paper, because obviously mailing stuff costs everyone money. So I just wanted to try to suss that bit out.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. The senator just said that the bill she introduced included data transfer as one of the things, but I can tell you, to your full question, we would want to propose something in this year's budget. And, you know, I'm sure the governor will either say something in the State of the State or with the budget once we tease out the proper way to get at this. And there are a few things we're looking at. One of the things is if we're just asking a local government, as you suggest, for data, and they're sending us paper data in all different formats, no one's going to look at it. We know that. So why don't we have an electronic interface to do those kinds of things where maybe we make a very small investment, but we save the local governments a significant amount of time and effort. But I think we're also looking to eliminate reports entirely, especially ones that are just collecting dust on shelves and no one's looking at it.
Speaking of the use of technology, here's a classic example, not report writing, but the cooperative purchasing bill that was just passed, signed into law. And the senator made reference to the fact that the comptroller's office is bringing up some concerns about that law. We've heard some pushback a little bit from the Office of General Services as well. We're the 50th state in the nation to allow for cooperative purchasing. Everybody else has been there for years. Of course, we have WICS, we have Triborough, we're also the only ones who have those things. But in this cooperative purchasing one, that has been figured out. And the technology that is allowing for significant reduction in the bidding process at the local level. We've done some research at this, and you have offices in school districts, counties, municipalities, where they spend enormous amount of resources just on putting together paper bids, advertising, all the process that is required. These national purchasing cooperatives are working using technology, using electronic means where comparative bids can be let to the people who meet your specifics, such as minority and women owned, lowest, most responsible bidder. Whatever those kinds of things that you build into this, you can do that, and you can see almost instantaneously a variety of different bids. We see it, of course, whenever we do airline flights, buy a pair of shoes online, anything else. That technology is available to school districts to make purchases as well. But we're already, even though this bill was just passed, we're already getting some pushback as to whether or not this is going to be something that we're going to be able to embrace fully. That's a very frustrating thing to actually have mandate relief presented to you and then slowly but surely eroding right before your eyes. Yes.
I'm Rick Zimmerman with the Northeast Ag and Feed Alliance, and perhaps as one of the final questions for the day, would you please review the rules and the role of the Mandate Relief Coalition, or Council, I guess is the proper name. And individually, I'd like your opinion as to what your perspective is on the effectiveness, or what the anticipated effectiveness of this council will be in the discussion that we've been having this afternoon.
Well, I'll go first because, as I said, I was on the Stan Lundeen Council. I was on the task force, and now I'm on this council. I have more hope for this council to be able to actually do something, because we're talking with people who are in the agencies, the commissioners, their representatives, and this is really at the direction of the governor. There are some things, some regulations, and looking at those agencies are now looking at being able to eliminate that regulation that they put in. Because the point is, if some of these regulations were done through an agency, they don't need to go through the legislature to get rid of it. They need to be able to get rid of that themselves. And they have proposed some regulations that they think could be eliminated, at least give them some flexibility. But I think that my understanding is we have to go at the suggestions. We keep getting them and reviewing them. We have to sit down and actually make a decision. Is this a mandate that we are going to be able to offer relief from, or not at this time? Or is there an alternative means for them to get the same result? And I've been somewhat disappointed in the offerings. I don't think they think that we need to have a lot more ideas put forward.
I agree with the senator's comments. I think, look, the senator also said before, I think, that we're going to make incremental progress. I think last year we did some major things. I mean, I keep coming back to them because they really were significant. Medicaid, both the admin takeover and the money, and Tier 6, and the other things which were both very difficult for the legislature to pass and very difficult now for us to manage on an ongoing basis. So I think from now on we have to look for those areas where we can make incremental progress, eliminate regulations we don't need or don't enforce or shouldn't be enforcing, the reporting stuff that we talked about, but also then I think going beyond that and working together on some of the things that people have raised here, some of these programs like pre-K special ed. We keep talking about it, but we don't really address the core problems. So I think we have to, we'll continue to push to address those issues as part of this council.
Rick, I looked at this, I'm sorry, go on. I looked at this definition of what are the criteria that we should be able to meet in order to have the council relieve you of this mandate. Unsound, unduly burdensome, or costly. I don't know if that's defined any closer than that, but that's all I've got available to me, and I don't know who defines that. If you look at the handout I have that shows the system, the process that is followed, there are a few ways in here that you could almost see the dead end right there. You basically are going to the agency that requires the mandate to have them review your petition and provide assistance in preparing the petition, and then have them sign off on your availability, your approving you to have that mandate relief. I worry that that's kind of like putting barbed wire on top of a 10-foot fence.
Yep, there's an appeal. If the agency doesn't sign off on your mandate, then it goes to the council.
Thanks, Tom. From the county's perspective, we're disappointed to respond to the question of the progress of the Mandate Relief Council. We had anticipated action during 2012 legislative session. Nothing came out, but we're hopeful. We think they're being deliberative. As the senator mentioned, they're looking for more ideas. As I presented from our perspective, we've got a $4 billion fiscal gap. We've got mandated growth in expenditures of $240 million with $100 million available through the property tax cap. It's almost irrelevant what the Mandate Relief Council does. What's relevant to us is the budget and the policies advanced by the governor in the budget. They're major programs, they're major policy changes. They have to be included in the budget, not necessarily as part of the work of the Mandate Relief Council. So we're going to continue working with the governor. He's indicated a strong desire to reform preschool special education. The state comptroller has issued a dozen audits in this area the past few days, past few months. So the time is really right for some serious reform in preschool special education. So we'll look forward to continuing that dialogue outside the Mandate Relief Council.
Well, thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for the audience.